pleasure to be here. I also wanted to introduce my colleague, Nina Levin, as well. Nina?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. It's currently the afternoon in the UK, but it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We very much appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today and to be able to give our insights from the data captured on our platform and throughout the industry. We want to primarily discuss our opportunities in virtual clinical operations, and is specifically focused on engagement. As Dr. Lawrence said, my name is James Koursaris. I'm the Senior Director of Business Partnerships at Within3, and Nina, my colleague, the Vice President of Client Success at Within3 as well. So today we'll be discussing the current environment and impact, primarily centered around the pandemic. We'll talk a little bit about what goes into effective digital collaboration in a virtual setting. We'll provide some potential best practices of what we've seen for successful engagement, and then we'll go through some very pertinent case studies where we see this playing out in a virtual form. It's very, very important for us to be able to identify and also provide as much insight as we possibly can during this sort of very flexible environment with the pandemic and moving forward. So as the virtual landscape evolves, we want to be at the center providing as much data and as much insight as we possibly can on engagement specifically. So just to orient the group with Within3, we are primarily in the life sciences industry. We look for areas in life sciences where communication is expensive, complicated, and time-consuming, and we build platforms to solve those problems. Our discussion platforms are world-renowned and are operating on a global basis. We have excellent compliance features to satisfy med legal and compliance teams, as well as a flexible and scalable operating platform to be able to control and provide great insights for clinical trial and clinical operational activities. Some of the great benefits include increased feedback from investigators and, most importantly, patients, greater interaction between teams in disparate regions, as well as improved market insights, and importantly enough, especially in the pandemic, with increased scarcity in budgets, very much reduced in terms of cost structures. We have become the industry standard in virtual communication. 20 out of the top 20 pharmaceutical organizations globally have used or are using our product. We have hundreds of implementations worldwide, currently in over 140 countries, and we really span the gamut with regard to use cases, whether it's virtual engagement with physicians, patients, payers, allied health teams, key opinion leaders, and healthcare professionals worldwide. We really break down the silos and barriers. So we find ourselves in a unique position to share our insights and the data collected within our sessions to the industry. Our global footprint is vast and has been growing immensely since the pandemic, and that's really great news, because our growth is a direct result of how the industry has been forced to adhere to a more virtual setting, especially in the pandemic. So we see that our industry and our colleagues are not only coping with the notion that most clinical trial opportunities are going to be moved to a more virtual setting, but they are thriving in that. And we'll show you some examples of that shortly. As we know, COVID-19 and the pandemic has really put an emphasis on a move to virtual stakeholder engagement. We don't want to lose, as an industry, we don't want to lose our appropriate, efficacious endpoints, and we don't want to lose our patient-centric approaches, but we don't want to also have delays that we're seeing a lot now in sort of the flexibility and the sort of fluidness of the current situation. So we want to offer some best practices and offer some opportunities where we can not only be conscientious trial designers and clinical operators, but also to be mindful of cost as well as to our patients. I want to start with this quote that we've found that from the CEO of Microsoft, where we see in just 2 months over 2 years worth of digital transformation, and that is incredible, especially given how we operate on the clinical side of things, and how we have an immense number of approvals and further approvals, and making sure that we are cross-examining everything for patient safety. So we've seen this incredible transformation, and we believe very strongly that the move towards virtual collaboration is here to stay and will evolve immensely in the future, even post-pandemic. We see some data here from Gartner that shows that 48% of employees will likely work remotely versus 30% before the pandemic. That's sort of an 18% swing, and we think that from an industry perspective, that is huge. It allows for lots of flexibility when it comes to how folks ingest and consume data, as well as how they are approaching their concentration towards virtual settings. It also presents some challenges too, with regard to distractions and multitasking. We also asked some questions of key opinion leaders. Beyond COVID, do they think that we're going to see a shift in virtual technology for engagement? And it was a resounding yes. And we think that's very part and parcel to the exposure of new technologies and new ways of working during this pandemic and even slightly before that. So what does effective digital engagement look like? How do we successfully navigate the opportunity to engage our stakeholders in a virtual setting? Well, everything is very much in flux, and everything is unique from a use case to use case perspective. What we've seen is a initial knee-jerk reaction to take everything that we've done and throw it into a Zoom meeting. We see that this has resulted over time in what we call Zoom fatigue, and it happens all the time. We have a lot more distractions that present challenges with regard to not just patient engagement, but investigator feedback and protocol design and trial design. We see that if we throw in a bunch of activities into an 8-hour or 4-hour Zoom call, after about an hour or so, we see a trail off in concentration. We see distractions from individuals who are basically in their home or area of choice. And we see a lack of concentration with regard to deeper insights. We have some modern discussion venues here, those live meetings that we're all used to. That's something that we can't do too much of anymore. Webcast, kind of like what we're doing right now, is very effective, especially from a virtual perspective, but it still brings the challenge of making sure that you are on time, on target, and ready to contribute with your insights, regardless of what's going on around you. And with a working from home or virtual setting, those distractions may be very, very different from doing a digital conference while you're in the office. What we specialize in is an overtime asynchronous meeting session. So we provide the opportunity for engagement across the globe at the leisure of the participant. And we'll go into those opportunities in the case study. Our discussion platform is extremely intuitive. We offer the opportunity to engage everybody in one specific platform and one specific homepage. Everything within the platform is transcripted, and the data is always captured in a quantifiable manner, so that moderators and the folks controlling the trial can export the data at any point in time. We also have online discussion forums where we can provide real-time document annotation, group-controlled co-authoring opportunities for trial design and protocol design in this new era, as well as opportunities to continuously improve documentation, continuously improve processes and process flows, and to make sure that everyone across the globe with a specific operation is not only in the know, but contributing to the success of the activity. So we see some great participation sentiment with regard to virtual collaboration. Everything that we've done from a survey perspective after our sessions and after all of our engagements is we've surveyed and gotten over 90% with regard to virtual engagement business use, and whether or not patients and key opinion leaders and caregivers would use this solution again for future collaboration and future insight gathering. Let's talk a little bit about best practices in patient engagement. Patient engagement is very, very important to us, and we're always trying to make sure that our partners are presenting the very best that they can with regard to the shift to digital. So some of the best practices that we see, and we'll see them in more detail in the case studies, is choosing the right participant. So teams first make sure that they are engaging with the right patients, specific criteria, and are able to really participate in the time frame of these virtual meetings. With our platform, it's really advantageous because, especially when you're talking about specific therapeutic areas, being available at a specific time may not be something that's possible for patients and for caregivers. So our platform provides a very flexible opportunity for the right patients to be able to contribute their insights without having to disrupt their day, especially if they have a condition that prevents them from being their best self at one specific time. We also want to choose the right questions to prompt robust discussion. So it's very, very different from a live setting where we want to be able to maximize the efficacy of the questioning as well as the level of insights that are being gleaned from the questioning. So we do a very thorough job of assisting our partners in forming and formatting question types so that they can get maximum participation, maximum engagement by the participants. We also have the opportunity to maintain confidentiality. This is very, very important, and we think with the shift to virtual, that will become more of a fluid opportunity. The positive outcomes of maintaining confidentiality can be really, really great, especially when talking about patient safety. And then we'll go into giving you some real-world examples of patient engagement success. So I want to introduce Nina too. She'll go through a couple of case studies that we've seen just recently with regard to not just patient engagement, but payer engagement and investigator feedback as well.
Thank you very much, James. So there are a few examples that I'm going to take you through. The first is around global payer engagement. So linking back to some of the earlier presentations, and hopefully this will give a bit of food for thought for those engagements. So ultimately, in this example, we had a situation where we had a clinical team looking to design trial to treat a rare disease, which had an average life expectancy of a year. Now, the product was expected to reduce the incidence of relapse and improve the quality of life, not the life expectancy. So not the usual key considerations for payers. And what our client needed to do was to gather understanding about how global payer organisations would really consider the quality of life and where that new treatment might be placed in formularies. Move forwards, James. So the challenge, of course, was the need to engage very quickly with those global payer stakeholders. The participants were based all over the world, making travel expensive and potentially quite difficult to get people together at the same time. And of course, with a global group of participants, they were more comfortable in lots of different languages. So they really needed that one-on-one interaction as well as that group format for the discussion to enable their team to comfortably do that. So where we were able to do that with them, they chose to use the platform to leverage this, which allowed, as James has framed beautifully, the participants to take part in this discussion over a period of several days. So what this meant was that the platform is open 24 hours a day for a certain period of time, and the participants were able to come in, take their time to digest any data that had been provided to them, any additional supporting information that they might need, and then to enter into discussion around it. Now, the platform allows them to use any device, so any web-enabled device, so very much at their own convenience. They can fit it around their existing commitments, of course. So if they're already busy with work meetings, they can fit in some time here and there when they have a moment to sit and work through the data, rather than having to set aside 4 hours to focus on this as an individual activity. And because the platform has live translation capabilities, it allows you to remove those language barriers that you might see globally, potentially allowing more participants to accept your invitations to these discussions and allowing you a broader view of the topic and their inputs. So they can enter into discussion in their own preferred language and then get a rough translation of any other languages that are used so that they can continue that discussion, removing those language barriers that you might face. So it allowed the team to obviously gather those considerations to evaluate the new treatments. They were able to confirm the endpoints of the upcoming trial. And of course, it helped to justify the economic viability of the new treatment. And just looking at some of the outputs, just to give you an idea of some of the numbers, and I can tell you the numbers vary across the different types of sessions. We had 67 pages of transcripted data. So we capture all of the verbatim responses in transcripts in real time. So a huge amount of data coming out. And I can tell you there are sessions that have even more than that still. That was 220 comments across the entire payer group, and we had 100% participation. So again, considering that drop-off that you might see in certain meetings, you can see that we have a strong drive behind that. And that's part of what the team that I work within does. So the client success team is here to support. We're here to support with consultancy and so on, but we also monitor the participation so that you can focus on being the experts in your discussion and not have to worry about the technology that you're using. We're ultimately an extension of your team to make your lives easier to do that. So moving on, the second case study is around patient retention and maximising that patient retention. So entering into discussion with investigators. So following a very successful recruitment period, a large pharmaceutical company's clinical team decided that they obviously needed to reduce the risk of patients deciding to prematurely discontinue their study. So the goal was to gather feedback from the investigators on best practice, again, on a global basis, so helping to share that practice across a much larger footprint than you might ordinarily, and being able to invite more people in potentially due to this overtime approach. Also looking at the assistance services that were being provided to patients, whether they were the same across the global team or different, and also looking at those support materials for the study. So it allowed the team to gain more insight into the patient and the caregiver experiences, which were very important in this case, and helped them to identify opportunities and gaps in the information that they had available. So again, using the Within3 platform, it allowed investigators globally to provide insights across multiple different study sites, so bringing them together when they couldn't physically travel to the same place. Again, one-on-one commentary as well as group discussion across multiple devices, and they were able to be completely candid and open with their thoughts. Now, one of the things we can do is actually blind the system so that you can't see the participants' names, which can also help with that candid share of information. In this case, we actually used their names and they were able to share that information openly because of the setup of the team. But looking at the results, there were very comprehensive suggestions for more clinical site visits to improve the investigator, patient and caregiver experience, insights on how to manage and to support the adherence to the therapy, and of course, importantly, valuable actionable learnings and operational feedback that they were able to use to apply to future studies and activities, as well as this one that they were working on. And finally, the third case study is really looking at the patient and caregiver side of things. So James has already talked about the different teams that we will work with and the different types of participants that you might engage with. But of course, the patient and the caregiver side of things is very important as well. So in this particular instance, we had a pharmaceutical company who were in the process of designing a clinical trial for a treatment that would address a mental health condition. It was requiring adherence through 1 pill a day, and it could be limited to the early onset only, so helping to decrease the potential for worsening conditions. There was a struggle around the adherence regimen, and therefore we needed the insights of not only the patients, but the caregivers in this particular type of disease. So the goals, of course, were to gather those insights from those two different groups, and here is another reference to the anonymizing of the system. So of course, in the case of patients and caregivers, it is vital that we are protecting them. We need to maintain the confidentiality, we need to protect them and their identities as we go through. Not only obviously from a comfort perspective to make sure we're also adhering legally as we should do and applying all GDPR compliance regulations. And of course, because of it being a mental health, unfortunately I have to say, of course, hopefully this will change over time, but due to the stigmas associated with individuals with this particular condition, there was potential as well for behavioural issues in trying to conduct a group-based research or a video-based setting. So allowing the participants to enter into the discussion over time and at their own convenience was much more appropriate in this case, really accommodating those patients and their caregivers to make sure that it was appropriate and comfortable for them. And in terms of the outcomes, again, using the platform, they were able to leverage the opportunity to keep the data confidential and to maintain the anonymous status of the study participants, so the patients and the caregivers, of course. They were able to participate both in private questions, so they could give individual responses to a set of questions, but also enter into group discussion as well. So we can have that sort of difference in the approach. So you could have very individual private questions that wouldn't be appropriate to ask in a group setting, balanced with those that you do obviously want to enter into a discussion around as well within that same room. And so it allowed the teams to obviously enter into it around their own schedules and even around any patient condition related situations. And the investigators were also able to be completely candid in their responses and enter into that discussion due to that blinded approach. So in terms of the session, it was actually split into 2 sessions to allow that follow-up, and it lasted for around 15 days. We had over 2,000 comments across the patient and caregiver group. So just again, building on those numbers I gave you earlier, and 10 times as many transcripted pages. So 665 pages of content. So the average output per advisor was 6.4 pages. So you can see that there is a lot of data coming through, and that obviously gives you a lot of information to drill down through and to help to identify trends in those responses, to identify how to move forwards with that information.
Thank you, Nina.
My pleasure.
So hopefully you got a really good idea of some of the opportunities that come with virtual engagement. Just to kind of give you a little bit of insight into some of the core use cases that we see from a clinical and R&D perspective, all the way through the life cycle of pharma and biotech. About 75% of the sessions that we see and the use cases that we run are involving external stakeholders, whether that's patients, payers, medical doctors, etc. We see normally that was much higher in the past, but now we see such a great identification of areas where typical activities that have normally not been considered for virtual engagement are now being considered, and that includes a lot of internal participant only protocol design or trial design segments. So we see that increase to about 25% of internal participants only. So we're very, very excited to see that shift, albeit slowly up until recent events. But we're being forced as an industry to kind of really move into that virtual realm and see how we can actually thrive instead of sort of cope with the pandemic, and how to continue to produce and put product to market. So the goal for us as an industry is to maintain the speed at which we are used to, if not get quicker in our evaluations, but also being conscientious to patient safety, as well as making sure that our primary and secondary endpoints and objectives for trials and clinical operations are still met. So it's almost as if we have accelerated what was the status quo into something virtual, and also maintain the same level of expectation. So I think we've seen a good number of industry engagement types over the last decade that we've been in business, and ultimately lately we're seeing so many different permutations of engagement types. What we see most often are even single session engagement to standing panels for advisor pools, all the way up to international and global reach engagements where anyone and everyone can contribute at their leisure over a period of time. So we sort of end our piece here with a question, and what is, because of the shift to virtual, what's even better than great digital stakeholder engagement? And we will go ahead and answer that for you. And that is continuous stakeholder engagement. Our goal as an organization and as an industry partner is to make sure that not only we're helping our partners be conscientious towards the trial and towards the patient, but also to make sure that all the data being gathered is freely provided, insightful, and a lot more robust than what we're normally used to. And for that, I will open it up to questions.
Thank you, James and Nina, for your presentation. And if you are interested in scheduling a meeting with James, Peter, and Nina, you can do so with our meeting scheduler app, or you can email myself, Sherry, Victor, and our team, and we can connect you to them directly. So if there's any questions, please feel free to type it ahead. Okay, so yeah, James, thank you again, and Nina, thank you again, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.